Hello, friend. The Mystical American Patriots Society is transmitting to you from beneath 4 million cubic feet of solid granite, in the burning heart of the Yellowstone caldera. This is a variety program for normal sandwich-eating Americans with some concerns about living in a deranged, post-Christian technocracy. So, keep your third eye on the sky and your ear to the ground, as Sumo and Smokestack connect your main brain vein to a higher plane. Are you ready? Stand by.
Oh, ya que será Cielito lindo, mi atoka. I don't know this song. I don't know the words or the music. That's not gonna stop me though. Lindo, mi atoka. Ay. I've been trying to learn Spanish so that I can. I've been trying to figure out where to escape to if America gets too bad. Where do you think is the best place to go?
Ooh, there's so many uninhabited places in America. I don't see there being the need to leave the country. I would just settle some wasteland.
Yeah, but a lot of people are looking around and they're like, is there an option between living in like a a dystopian sci-fi novel and also being a hermit? Is there like a middle ground?
Sure. I think Uruguay would do well.
Uruguay?
Yeah.
What do you like about that?
Well, it's way over on the east coast of South America, kind of out of the drug trafficking corridor. Sure. They have a robust gaucho culture there.
That's what I always look for.
Property's pretty cheap, I think. It's one of those places where Westerners go to retire like kings, and I think for the most part it's probably less hostile to that than a lot of other places. Like if you go to Hawaii on vacation, you get some grief. You get some guff.
Like if everyone moved to Hawaii in one thing, it would be bad. What about Belize? Don't they speak English, but they're like Central American?
I don't know. I've never been to Belize. I've never been to Uruguay either. But
I think Belize speaks English primarily.
Mm-hmm.
And they're a Caribbean country.
I feel like Belize is kind of already a bug out location now, right?
Yeah.
Where's John McAfee hiding out? Where's he?
Oh, he's somewhere down there. I thought Honduras.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, my wife's uncle went on a trip, I think, to Belize for a time, or maybe Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And we just lost him for like 3 years. He just decided he wouldn't come back and also not tell anybody. And he never sent any communications. He was like, I'm going on vacation to Mexico. He was a school teacher.
Uh-huh.
And it was the summer, and he was like, I'm going to go summer in Mexico or Belize. I forget. And he went away, and then the school year came around, and he just wasn't there. And everyone tried to call him and stuff, and he didn't answer. And then like 3 years later, he showed up. Like, oh yeah, I decided to stay longer.
Any particular reason? Yeah, you have like a love affair.
I've lost a lot of people that way. I was friends with this guy in school named Automac.
Mm-hmm.
And he was from Brazil. And he told me, oh yeah, over the summer I'm going to go. I can't do a Brazilian guy accent, but I'm going to try. Oh, over the summer, I am going to go back to Brazil on my motorcycle. Is that Brazilian?
No, not even close. I think that was like kung fu, closer to kung fu.
But anyway, he said he was going to ride his motorcycle to Brazil, and I said, Automach, I don't think. A, I'm not sure that's actually possible for you to ride home on a motorcycle. And then B, you're going to have to go through a lot of sketchy places to make that happen. And so he went off, and then he never came back, and that was the last I ever heard of him. I have no idea.
So he did at least attempt to get to Brazil on a motorcycle.
Yeah, he got on a motorcycle and he left, and then that was the last we ever saw of him.
I mean, you got to travel through all of Mexico. He could have made it
and decided to not come back. He could have been killed by a drug cartel. He could have just gotten a bad accident. He could have just went somewhere else. I don't know. But anytime someone gets in an RV or a motorcycle and drives down past the border, they seem to just disappear. Yeah. That's what makes me think it's a good place for people to go to disappear from America on purpose. But I always thought Argentina might be good.
There's a long history of interesting people hiding out in Argentina.
Yeah, like Hitler's.
Yeah.
I think Hitler really did survive the war. I know that's pretty crazy, but there's some pictures of a dude in Argentina after the war that look exactly like Hitler. Like, it's not even close. It's like that's just Hitler when he shaved his mustache.
Interesting.
Yeah, and there was a bunch of Nazis that escaped there.
Right. Well, we sent them. We sent them there. I mean, that was part of the deal. Is the whole Operation Paperclip thing.
Yeah, we sent them there, and then so maybe it was the end of the war, and Hitler was up in his eagle's nest, and he called up the president and was like, "Hey, look, I'll surrender, and I'll give you Werner von Braun and a few other and the UFOs, obviously. But you got to put me in South America." And they said, "Okay."
I believe that.
That's probably close to what really happened. Because see, that's the thing about if you want to escape on this hemisphere, you either have to learn Spanish because Canada is worse.
Yeah, I wouldn't go to Canada unless you're going to like middle of nowhere Canada and you're gonna be a mountain man, because that's beautiful and there's just animals everywhere that you can eat all the time.
Yeah, much higher chance of seeing Bigfoot.
But civilized Canada is not somewhere I'd want to hang out.
Awful.
No,
it's awful. But see, so otherwise on this hemisphere, you either have to get good with Spanish or maybe Portuguese. You go to the one country, or Belize speaks English, but it's very small.
Right.
And I guess the islands in the Caribbean also have different languages they use.
Well, they tend to machete all the gringos when stuff gets rough historically. I feel like the islands are too ripe for revolution. In that situation,
you have to gentrify them first.
You have to gentrify them. Okay.
Well, historically, the way that neighborhoods get gentrified, and I often wonder if this is the reason they promote gayness so much, because gays are like, you ever seen in Star Trek when they wanted to make a planet habitable, they had a Genesis bomb? No,
that sounds interesting. Okay.
And it would like go down, and it was like an organic bomb of some kind, like waves of goodness, of waves of Eden, and it would, and then like greenness would explode over the planet, and that would kickstart geoengineering. Gays are like that for neighborhoods. What you do is you put in a bunch of you make the gays move in, right? And then within like 10 years, property values have gone up a lot, and there's renewed police presence because they don't care about schools, right? And they just move in, and in fact, the rundownness of it sort of appeals to them. But they move in, and then they want nicer things alongside the rundown things. So all I'm saying is, if we just export homosexuality to the Caribbean in mass, A lot of the people there will probably go back to Africa.
This is getting to be kind of a rough, hard to sell idea.
I know. I'm just saying. That's how it happens in inner cities.
It does.
That is exactly how it happens in inner cities. There was a classic case in San Francisco and in Atlanta. There were lots of rundown neighborhoods. The gays came in there, and everyone in there fled to somewhere else.
I mean, I would flee.
The property values got too high.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but today. I was going to talk about some things I think are going to be near to your heart. Where I'm going to talk about 2 conspiracies.
Sweet.
And then we're going to learn the Tao of Conspiracy.
Because
a lot of people I've been seeing, a lot of people are new to the conspiracy thing now.
Yeah.
Everyone, especially people on the Russian conspiracy side, are all the Russian collusion people, their conspiracies are very badly done.
That's the truth.
Because it's like I welcome them thinking that everything's a big game, like a big conspiracy game, but it's just not well thought out, and they just say, "Oh, Putin told you to do something," and secretly behind the scenes, everything's Putin.
They kind of went a little like old school Batman, like the animated series, where like everything is the Penguin standing there going.
Yeah, everything is the Penguin standing there going. Yeah, and that's not how it happens, And so I feel like they need some and on the other side, the QAnon people, they think that conspiracies. So the left, the Russia conspiracy that the left is propping up is extremely simplistic. It's just one guy and maybe another guy meeting behind a closet and going ha 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 and twirling their mustaches.
Right.
On the right side, with the QAnon people, it's infinitely complex.
That way, everything that happens is part of the plan, no matter what happens.
Anything that happens.
No, it was killing me the other day when I've never even heard of this guy, this FBI lawyer that suddenly is such a big deal, even though nobody outside of the Q people have ever heard his name, is going to plead guilty to changing evidence, and none of the big names, at least thus far, are going down. And I was like, well, guys, this sure looks like a patsy going down to just put a little bow on this thing and make it go away. They're like, no, man. Trust the plan. I mean, McCabe's coming down next. Like, okay.
I don't hate on the Q people because they have, through some weird cult way, organized.
Yeah. And they're adorable.
They're all just the boomer generation.
Yeah.
They've been like, but it's not a realistic conspiracy theory.
Unfortunately not.
I
would love to see the Perp Walk parade. I would love it.
But it's not going to happen.
I don't think it's going to happen.
It's not how things work. So I thought we'd look at 2 conspiracies. Well, not really conspiracies. One of them's sort of a conspiracy. One of them's just sort of like alternative science. And I don't want the show to become, you see this other thing? Also don't believe in that.
We don't want to pee in people's Cheerios too often.
Yeah, I don't want to do that, but I have to do that a little bit today.
Okay.
For numerous reasons. But I'm going to start with the one I think that you're familiar with.
All right.
And I don't know that you're familiar with it.
Okay.
Just like I thought you would be familiar with the Genesis bomb. But you were not.
Well, our listeners need to understand that we don't speak almost at all outside of recording the show, including show prep.
That's right.
And if you understand that, our show is a lot more enjoyable, I think.
Yeah. So, have you ever heard of... Well, let's get the background first. I was thinking this week about... I made a comment offhand, because all the virus stuff is still going on.
I'd heard of viruses, yeah.
viruses are still happening. There's still one going around. And so there's this this feeling that people are all waiting for a vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's a vaccine. We all want a vaccine. Unless it's made in Russia, then we don't trust the vaccine. Okay. But then I made an offhand comment to a lady. And she was talking about it. I said, there's no guarantee a vaccine is even possible.
Mm-hmm.
Or if it is, that it will be effective enough to actually completely make this go away. And she gave me the most horrified look, like, like,
yeah.
Like, and then I was like, well, what was that about? Because it just had never even crossed her mind. And I don't think it had crossed anybody's mind. But I said, I made the common thing. I was like, well, there's still no vaccine for HIV
Mm-hmm.
or the common cold, right?
Yep.
And the flu is one that sometimes works, but it mutates every year, so you have to take another one if you want to keep up on your vaccines. And sometimes they don't give you the right one, and you still have a bad flu season. And I said, who's to say that COVID isn't like the first ones where you can't get a vaccine for it?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's never been one for a SARS virus. Or if you can, who's to say it won't be like as or maybe less effective than the current flu one? Right?
Right.
It seems logical. But that was just like
Angry turkey moment.
Yeah, there's a certain class of woman that they're usually floppy. By which I mean like there's in their mannerisms, not necessarily in their body.
Mm-hmm.
But they wear a lot of jangles.
Yeah.
Like their wrists are covered in jangles and their ears have jangles. And then they go, then when they talk, they're sort of shake their head like a dog shaking off water.
Mm-hmm.
That was sort of what it is. But that's when they go into panic mode. And because she's been, the narrative this whole time has been like, well, the vaccine's going to fix it all.
Right.
And then someone saying like, well, I don't even know, is that even real? But leave that aside for a minute. After that interaction, I was thinking, well, why is it that you can't get vaccines for some viruses? And I've never heard this properly explained or addressed.
Mm-hmm.
It's like they've been looking for a thing for HIV for like 40 years and like nothing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, I guess it's probably longer, 50, 60 years. And they're no closer to it, and I think they've mostly given up. Maybe because they still plan on deploying Genesis bombs. I don't know. I spent time this week with a friend that makes a lot of horrible jokes.
Mm-hmm.
And he's got me in that mood.
Oh,
but
yeah.
Anyway, so why not? Why is it? And then why does why isn't there one for the common cold? Why isn't this and that? And one of the standard answers for the common cold is like, well, it isn't economically feasible. And I'm like, that is not like, that's what people will tell you. Like, well, there's no economic incentive to make one for the common cold. And then you stop and you think about that for a second and you go, that's not true. People get the cold like 3 or 4 times a year.
Mm-hmm.
If you just had a thing and you said, if you get this shot, you won't get a cold this year when your kids go back to school, and they won't get one either. People would pay for that out the nose.
Oh, man.
Of course there's an incentive to get one. Like, what does that even mean?
Well, that and the common cold will get a lot scarier when there's a vaccine to sell.
Right.
The marketing will arise in the presence of a product.
Yeah. And so, that's one example of people just like, you give an answer. This is something they tell you in magic, in stage magic.
Mm-hmm.
They say you don't need a good reason, you just need a reason to do something for something.
Okay.
And if you give people a reason, they'll go, oh, okay, and they'll go with it.
Mm-hmm.
And most people don't question things.
Yeah.
And so when you say, now hold this, and I'm going to put this in my pocket, and the people are, oh, okay. And they never, as long as you don't hesitate,
mm-hmm.
then people just go along with the story you're selling. And that's one of those examples where people are like, well, it's not economically feasible to make a coronavirus, to make a COVID virus. Like, and then you say, everyone goes, oh, yeah, that is not economically feasible. And they repeat that to their friends, and they get on Reddit.
Yep.
And they say, well, you can't make one. And then, but if you just say, you say, wait a minute, that's not true.
Right.
That's nonsense. Of course, there's a reason. Of course, there's an economic thing. They just can't do it well.
Yeah.
Right. It just mutates too fast or something like that. Maybe. Okay. Okay. So why we have that and HIV, but we also have this big success story of like polio vaccination. And what's the one they give kids all the time now?
Measles,
mumps, rubella.
Mm-hmm.
I never had mumps, and I don't know anyone that had mumps, so maybe that's working, right? So what is the difference? What is it that some viruses it works for and some it doesn't? And then I was looking, and I asked that question around, and no one has an answer other than they say, well, some viruses mutate more than other viruses. And then you say, well, why? And they go, well, I don't know. And then this is not going to turn into an anti-vaccine podcast. Unless you guys want it to be.
Let us know.
But I was looking at graphs. I spent some time looking at graphs of like the number of people with various cases, like the number of cases of polio over time.
Yeah, I know where this is
going. And the number of cases of SARS over time. And the number of cases of bird flu over time, right? And they all look the same.
Yeah.
It's all the same curve. And then I thought for a moment, well, did the polio vaccine do anything? Because the SARS went away by itself over time. And they gave the polio, it looked like when it was already sort of on the downslope.
Exactly.
Maybe it was just disappearing naturally, and I don't want to go down that road.
Yeah, sure.
I don't want to, find myself at someone as in a naturopath's office by the end of the episode. But there's a question there. But assuming that the vaccines work as they say, right? Why do they work on some and not others? And I could not find any good explanation for this until I heard of a wild theory until I heard of a discredited theory in biology that made it make sort of sense. Have you ever heard of terrain theory?
No.
So in the 1800s to late 1900s, that's when a lot of our modern understanding of like medicine happened. Largely from this guy named Louis Pasteur, who you may have heard of from the pasteurization process.
Oh, yes.
Okay. What you may not know about Louis Pasteur is that he had a rather bitter rivalry with another French scientist named Antoine Béchamp.
Right.
You know about Anthony?
I've seen like the edges of this Pasteur versus Béchamp thing.
Yeah, it's become sort of a thing passed around lately. But anyway, Louis Pasteur came up with basically germ theory, which we're not arguing against germs existing. But he's the guy that came up with this, and he said, look, and largely not because he was a genius, but just because he happened to be one of the first scientists in a wealthy country at the time of the invention of the microscope.
Gotcha.
And so he had a microscope, and he was like, "Oh, look, there's some little tiny critters." And that was his contribution. And then so the germ he proposed that diseases like cholera and colds and chickenpox and measles and Spanish typhus, a blood clotting disease or whatever, were caused by these little guys getting inside of you and messing stuff up. And that is what we still go with today. right?
Right.
The main. And then you can think of it, it's like, and really, when you look at it, this was motivated largely by people going, they look through their microscope at the first time and they see these little tiny things crawling around. They go, ah, get them out of me, get them out of me, get them out of me.
Which is natural.
Which is natural. And so that became this whole thing, which that gives you the whole health environment that we have now, which is get rid of germs equal healthy, right? You sterilize the environment, bleach, Lysol, alcohol, sanitizer. You try to seal yourself off from the environment. You wear masks, face shields, gloves, doctors' coats, you know, and you seal yourself off from it, and you try to kill everything. You wipe down everything. You spray stuff on stuff, you know, and it's sort of. I mean, it's sort of one. A lot of these things are somewhat toxic. That is a problem. That's something mommy bloggers complain about, and they're right. You know, but it's also, when you think about, like, oh, you wipe down all the surfaces, that has limited use. Like if you're on an operating table, that makes sense, right? But how effective is that, like, in just the world?
Right.
I don't think it's very effective, because if you know things about people shedding viruses, they're just dripping it all over the place. You'd have to get like every corner of every surface. It doesn't really. I'm highly doubtful that the wiping down of stuff is effective, right?
Sure.
And then it also is this. It also has a metaphysical assumption underneath it that you can cut yourself off from the world, right? And then, but you can't. But we tend to feel like we are so separate from the universe and the world that we can be isolated from it. So that's one. That's germ theory, right? But then terrain theory was this other guy, Bachamp, and he said, "Oh no," he said he had a different idea. He said, actually, these microbes, viruses and germs, are created by the body when damage has occurred. So you get a damaged tissue, and the body creates these things either as a malfunctioning of the damaged tissue, or as a sort of like a cleanup crew of debris. Okay. So Pasteur basically believes microbes were the cause of the disease, and Bachamp, on the other hand, believed that the terrain of the damaged body, it wasn't quite clear to me, it either attracts the germs to come to it, or creates it itself, and maybe both. So there may be germs around and the damaged tissue, and they're drawn to it like scavengers, or perhaps they are spontaneously generated by the body.
Okay.
Which sounds ridiculous. But wait. Okay. Because when you think about it, now there's a lot of problems. One, Pasteur plagiarized Bachamp for his thing about fermentation.
Ooh.
Bachamp talked about it first, and like all the yeast fermentation and stuff. And he accused Pasteur of plagiarizing him, as did the French Academy of Sciences. So the French Academy of Sciences agreed with Bachamp at the time that, yeah, Louis Pasteur plagiarized you, but somehow this didn't make it overseas. And so Pasteur gets all the credit. Okay. But, so think about viruses. This is what when I heard this, I was like, everyone was like, this is a discredited theory. And then I said, well, actually, that, like, because viruses are not technically alive.
True.
Or at least it's debatable. They don't have cells. Everything else that lives has cells.
They're not really metabolic. I mean,
they're not metabolic, and they don't reproduce in the typical fashion.
Right.
What do? A virus attaches to a cell. Somehow it injects its DNA into the cell, and then the cell copies the DNA of the virus. And that's its mode of quote unquote reproduction. But so first of all, that's sort of exactly what Bechamp said, is that the body produces the virus. He was right about that.
Right.
Right. That's exactly what he said. Like, because the virus, something wrong in the cell reproduces the virus.
Mm-hmm.
But then you say, okay, but then why do these things keep coming back up? Like, well, actually ask yourself the question of where did the first virus come from?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like, you can think of like microbes maybe, because that fits in with the whole theory of evolution, and I was like, oh, there's single-celled organisms and they develop into multi-celled organisms. But what about these viruses that are no-celled organisms? Where do they come from?
Right.
If they reproduce and are generated by the body, then they had to at first have been generated by the body anyway, which is directly Bechamp's theory. Is that not so? And so then you think, okay, well, maybe there's no vaccine for HIV. So imagine that you have your body and it breaks down in predictable ways, like a car breaks down in similar ways for similar people. Spark plugs go out.
Yeah.
Carburetor fails, right? Bust an axle. Similar things. And those produce similar problems. What if, when something goes wrong with cell division or some other thing in the body, things break in a repeatable way among people, or pretty similar, and that produces the virus to begin with? So maybe there's a very common metabolic process that sometimes goes wrong in the same way very often among people, and that's why the cold keeps happening over and over again. That's not to say that you can't then take that virus and spread it, right? But maybe you produced it. Is that possible?
So there's still room in here for this thing to be truly communicable in the way that we think of disease.
You could hybridize these two theories.
Okay.
Because and this is why I wanted to talk about the Tao of Conspiracy, because a lot of what people do is they'll have some theory and they just completely reject it and they put in some other cockamamie theory.
Right.
Right. And I think what you do is you say, well, just it's not totally there, and maybe there's some more stuff to it.
Mm-hmm.
Don't throw out the whole baby.
Mm-hmm.
You know, keep some of the bathwater, or vice versa. And so, is it possible that these viruses are like, and maybe that's why there's no AIDS vaccine, because if you do certain sexual practices over and over again, you're likely to spontaneously create the AIDS virus, because that's the theory in the beginning, is that there's some abnormal behavior among people. Either it was doing a lot of sex stuff, or it was like people eating monkeys or something, monkey brains, and this spontaneously generated a virus. So it's not that far out there, because you think like, well, maybe just the spontaneous generation of viruses happens more often, and they are also communicable, but they also and that's why they have subtle variations from year to year, because different people generate them. It's like your carburetor broke down, and that's very similar to, but not exactly the same as, another carburetor that broke.
Mm-hmm.
So is this not plausible? I thought you might have heard of this because you're an alternative medicine guy.
Well, there's a lot of talk about maybe HIV doesn't really cause AIDS.
Yeah, but that's a whole nother.
Well, it's similar, because there's been some evidence for people getting AIDS, the syndrome, without being HIV positive. People that live, those certain lifestyles that are prone to that. And then other people that live their whole life with HIV and never develop AIDS. Right.
Yes, exactly. And also, you got to think like, and I don't want to keep harping on this, but it's clear that epidemiology is not it doesn't have the full picture, because their models are consistently wrong all the time.
I definitely agree with that.
Which means that viruses don't work the way people think they do.
Yeah.
Because like if viruses work that way, then every time you're around someone with any kind of virus, you would also get it, pretty much.
Right.
And the excuse is this black box of, well, your immune system fought it off. But then there's never well, why does one immune, that's just a black box that means I don't know why it happened or didn't happen. You know, you just say some people get it, some people don't, and you say immune system, and that covers any inconsistencies.
Right.
But it's not explained, and no one really knows what it means or how it works. We know white blood cells chase down stuff. That's it.
So I saw an interesting theory, and this will be kind of related. Is that the the COVID in some instances is involved somehow with radiation poisoning, and they were going through.
Is that why you were measuring your radiation the other day?
Yeah, I bought a Geiger counter / personal radiation monitor, and I've been playing with it because this dude threw this theory out, and I said, well, that's interesting, and he made a couple of examples. Specifically the toes, the COVID toes thing, that kind of popped up and then went away real quick because I think it only happened in certain areas.
No, wait, I didn't hear about the COVID toes.
You get like red frostbite, like mild frostbite looking toes.
Yeah.
And that was really weird, and it kind of popped up early on in this thing and then went away. Okay.
Yeah.
And that the time that it popped up was when the New York thing was happening.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, why did this go? Why was this a thing during the worst effects of COVID thus far in America? And then disappeared from the discourse as the virus epidemic spread out into other areas.
Right.
Well, if there were some sort of geographic factor affecting New York, which has been bothering me this whole time. We've talked about it several times, like what happened in New York, New Jersey that didn't happen everywhere else, because there's some profound differences the way this thing is rolled out. And so this dude's theory was there's a radiological event, and maybe like as in the Béchamp idea, something is broken that either gives rise to the virus, or maybe if I were to modify it a bit, makes one susceptible to the virus in a particular way that didn't happen elsewhere, and then pop your puzzle piece into that slot. Maybe radiation poisoning, maybe fungal infections, maybe whatever. Right,
and it's because you start when you just it's like when people say, "Oh, there's no economic incentive for a cold virus." People are like, oh, well, we understand how viruses and stuff work, and we understand health. And then you step back a minute and say, then why is everyone unhealthy?
Yeah.
It's like, if we understand medicine so well, and why is America one of the most unhealthy populations to have ever lived?
If we understood medicine so well, we wouldn't be eating industrial seed or oils as like a third or a 2/3 part of our caloric intake.
Yeah, and it's not just the diet though. It's like, because there are people that have relatively good diets, and there's all these autoimmune diseases. Mm-hmm. There's like asthma and like all these things, and people have these recurrent migraines, and there's cancers, and it's like, well, what's causing all these things? And people either don't know or don't care, and it's just assumed. And you say, well, maybe our over reliance on germ theory and killing germs as the only thing that matters is ignoring the fact that disease possibly could be self-generated. And not even possibly. They say this. They say like HIV happened because people were doing weird stuff with monkeys.
Yeah.
That's the official line. And then it just spontaneously was created. Or coronavirus, there was a wombat, some Chinese guy was playing tennis with it. And then that's why Como locked down the state. Right. Because of because some Australian wombat got into a koala fight and moved to China. And so this is part of the theory of viruses, that they auto-generate from weird behavior. Right? That's just baked into even the standard theory. But so maybe we ignore the fact that we can auto-generate these viruses and maybe other kinds of microbes through being exposed to various environmental factors, poisons, toxins, or whatever that make all these other things happen too.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe both are true. Maybe Bachamp is worth another look at these days.
I think he is, and also I think we have a problem. We end up in these narrow, like everything is the result of pure germ theory, and we look at everything through that lens because we're addicted to theories. We
are.
And sometimes at the expense of utilizing good phenomenology.
Yeah.
Sometimes if I can say, wow, every time I do this, this happens, and I don't have a theory behind it, people are trained not to believe the phenomenology. Or they reject it as unimportant because there's no systematic theory to explain the phenomenon. So therefore they reject it. But in other modes of thinking throughout human history, phenomenology was given a little bit more importance, and you were to say, hey, every time I eat this plant, whatever, some good thing happens. Maybe this plant gives me these good things.
And people say, well, how would that work? And you say, I'm not sure.
You say, I don't know.
Say, well, then it can't work.
Right. Well, then they say, if I don't know, it doesn't work if you don't know how it works, which is an error.
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same thing that happens with like psi phenomena.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say psychic communications, foreshadowing, clairvoyance, all this stuff. There is so much evidence that happens in a limited degree.
Mm-hmm.
That it is undeniable.
Yeah.
You can do the experiments over and over again that people if you have like, say 4 cards and one has a diamond on it, one has a circle, one has a square, one has a triangle. And you just hold them up where the other guy can't see them, or you shuffle them or whatever. And then you say, I'm going to think about it, and you tell me which one it is, right? And the other guy never sees it, and he says one of the shapes, and you record it, and you record which one it actually was. You can do this experiment at your house, even if you do this thousands of times, right? There are people that can get it right, like 30% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
But it should be 25% of the time,
mm-hmm.
right? And that is if you do that enough times, that's statistically next to impossible.
Yeah.
Right. You just can't. And there are some, and honestly, I did this once with a kid. I did this test, and before I told him what it was, for like the first 10, 20, he was hitting every one of them.
Mm-hmm.
It was crazy. And you can do it with people, like feeling people stare at you from a distance.
Yeah.
Stare at the back of your head. People can tell when someone is calling them on the phone. How often have you thought about somebody and then they call you immediately?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's so much evidence, but no one can explain how it could be, the mechanism behind how it could happen. And so it's just all of that is completely discounted.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a huge problem. Thing. It's a huge problem, I think.
Yeah. So then, with that in mind, let's realize that Brontosaurus has never existed.
Is that like a big scale germ?
It's a big scale germ. Well, the this isn't even controversial. This is now it's a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to go back and I had to find, because I remember this happening in the early 2010s.
Mm-hmm.
There was this big rush of articles that were suddenly published. It was like coming clean about the dinosaur thing, and then everyone stopped talking about it. But I went back and I found the articles. Okay, so this one was one in NPR. It said, "Forget extinct. The Brontosaurus never even existed." December 9th, 2012, NPR. Okay. And they say in there, quote, "Scientifically speaking, there's no such thing as a Brontosaurus." Which is weird because that's like the most commonly known dinosaur. There's like T-Rex and then Brontosaurus.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right?
This is T-Rex, stuff of my childhood.
Triceratops, right? That's in Jurassic Park. But So here's the thing. It goes back to another one of these science rivalries. So 130 years ago, roughly, I guess 140 now, there was a period in paleontology known as the Bone Wars.
Sounds awesome.
Yeah, it does sound great. Well, back then, people used to be more scientists used to be cooler.
Mm-hmm.
And though they were grifters and liars, they're probably not as much as today.
Mm-hmm.
Like I like reading about the early Egyptologists because they would just like scramble, like I got to find the tomb of the next big pharaoh first, and then they'd get wind that their competitor was getting close to something, so they just dynamite through half a pyramid, just got to it, and just destroy everything between, like all the priceless artifacts, just boom. But I got the pharaoh first, all that great stuff. So there was this guy named O.C. Marsh, and he was at Yale. Okay. And there was another guy named Cope out of Philadelphia. Cope. This is a Cope. I don't know. So they had this big, like, I'm going to be the best dinosaur finder. I'm going to be the best dinosaur finder. And the other guy was like, no, I'm going to be the best. And they kept trying to race these dinosaurs to publication. Okay. So, and they were also like, both of them did this. Like they would send their team to the other guy's dig and just smash up the bones.
Oh no.
Just like, I don't want him to have it. When he's gone at night, just smash up his skeleton, or steal it or something. And it was this thing. So anyway, in 1877, Marsh discovered the partial skeleton of a long-necked, long-tailed animal that they've later come to decide was an Apatosaurus. But it didn't have its skull on it, right? But he wasn't going to let that stop him. So when he came to display the skeleton, he stuck the skull of another dinosaur, which he thought was a Camarasaurus, but really wasn't even that. They've now decided it was a different animal, onto the Brontosaurus and just said, there you go, there's your animal. And he put this in the museums, and it was taking pictures of it. He says, it's a Brontosaurus. And so, like, what they had was a 50% maybe of some big animal, right? Skeleton. They had the rest of the pieces filled in based on other skeletons, and then a skull that was never found of this creature, because skulls decay fairly more quickly than vertebrae. They're thinner bones. And he just took a skull from a different animal and plopped it on there, and then that was in Jurassic Park. And that happens all the time. Like, so,
and scientists don't want us to think that they do this.
I know,
but they do this they do this today. People act like this out of pride and vanity all the time.
Yes. And so the mistake was spotted by some people in 1903, right?
Whoa.
But they didn't do anything about it for 50 years.
Wow.
That model remained in the public eye and in the museums for 50 years until they decided, well, they went to go take another look at it, and they said, and not only that, but the skull he put on there was from a completely different site in a different state. Like it wasn't even like could have been.
Right.
It was like this fossil was found in Utah and this fossil was found in Philadelphia, and just make it an animal.
Man.
Because I need that publication. Right?
Scientists.
And then and then they said in 1980 they put on the correct head. But who knows?
Sure. Right? Well, where'd they get that? And how do they know it was correct?
Right. Now, here's the thing, though. Here's the thing. Okay. And people were talking about, like, well, why did Brontosaurus, the name Brontosaurus, stick and Apatosaurus didn't? Because now what they do is they just call the Apatosaurus the Brontosaurus sometimes in public, even though they said, well, Brontosaurus means thunder lizard. So it's big and evocative, and people sort of know it from Jurassic Park because, our biggest public selling is this work of fiction, much like our bone skeletons. And Apatosaurus means deceptive lizard.
Mm.
Think about it. Is
Fitting.
that some like a cult nonsense? Like this is a fake lizard, like deceptive, like the Brontosaurus wasn't real, but the deceptive saurus, that's the real one.
It's the elected official of the dinosaur
world. Why would
world.
they call it the deceptive? That doesn't. Why do that? I don't know. There was another one about the same thing. The Smithsonian magazine, the mystery. I went through and I looked up all these things, so I'd have them to make sure I could back up what I was saying. Smithsonian magazine, the mystery of the missing brontosaurus head, August 23rd, 2010. Okay, and so it talks about there was more often than not, quote, sauropod dinosaurs, these big ones that plod along, that they say plod along and ate leaves, are found without heads, right? Their thick limb bones and vertebrae make it into the fossil record, but their frail skulls don't, right? And that also, is we never find a complete skeleton of them. We just find pieces, and then we find similar pieces with other pieces over there, and then we just mash it together later. So you don't. The idea that you find like a complete skeleton in the ground from millions of years ago is just fantasy. Almost never happens.
You can't even find a complete skeleton of like a raccoon. Whenever I find a skeleton, it's scattered all over the place, and only half of it's there.
Right. And so like that, and so what they do is you find like something that you think is a Apatosaurus, and you find another piece of Apatosaurus, which you think is a Apatosaurus elsewhere, and then you find another one, and you say, well, I've got some spine from this one, I've got some legs from this one, here's some shoulder blades from this one. Let's all just put them together. But there's there's a lot of room for mistakes in that process.
No kidding, yeah.
Is all I'm saying, and that is how this is how actually dinosaurs come together in the thing. Okay. Not only that, but the appearance that there are way more fossils than there are is a big problem, because almost without exception, everything you see in a museum is just a plaster cast of a real bones. But as they explain in these articles, not always, because sometimes they only have like 30% of the skeletons, and they just guess at the rest of the bones.
Yeah.
Make them up on a 3D printer. They just make them up out of nowhere based on like today animals and make them bigger. So like, well, we're missing like the leg bones of this dinosaur. Why don't we take a chicken leg bone and just scale it up, and then make a plaster cast of that, and then stick it on there? And that is what is in the museum. That's borderline fraudulent.
It is.
You know?
Yeah.
So so anyway, the let's see here. Oh, there was one. And these dinosaurs always have these horrible names. Diplodocus. So there was a recording in a Utah site. They found a Dilophosaurus skull, right? And they found it in these different positions and whatever, and they put it on this Dilophosaurus. And then the paleontologist, after a few years, he goes, "Wait a minute, have we ever actually found the skull alongside the body? Or are we just playing?" And it was the same thing. It's like they found these skulls. They said, "Oh yeah, this," and then he realized, "No, we haven't." And so then they just went through and they said, "Oh, okay, all these heads are probably wrong. Like these aren't real.
We done goofed.
And so so this is another thing. June 11th, 2019, in fieldmuseum.org. This is a recent one. Which dinosaur bones are quote unquote real? So the claim is that Sue the T-Rex is one of the most complete fossils at 90% complete. Which, it's fine.
Pretty good.
Maybe. I don't know. Who knows anymore? But then the other ones they have there is like, oh, the rest of them are like 100% just cast moldings. So and this is where like this is how we're trying to teach you the Tao of conspiracies, because the correct answer here is not to say dinosaurs are fake. Some dinosaurs are fake, obviously. The Brontosaurus is not real, but fossils exist. There are bones from a long time ago, or like, impressions of bones. I have found fossils outside. I have seen dinosaur footprints out in Utah that are up on the mountain, right? Or claimed dinosaur footprint. There are fossils of things from a long time ago that exist. But what you say instead is, I'm not sure that your reconstruction of this event is accurate.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really all you need to say to avoid all of the weird conclusions that come out of these things. Because you just say, well, look, the Brontosaurus isn't real. You put on the head of a different animal. What's to say that the rest of it is quite together? Yeah. So here's another case. So this is in that same article. Quote, in some cases, scientists have yet to find a particular bone from a certain species, so they just never find it. They very rarely unearth it. An intact dinosaur skeleton, scavengers disturb decomposing bodies, erosion, of the bones. So they just make it up in the absence. They fill in the gaps with things but this leads to very not correct animals, because you just sort of smash together pieces of other animals and scale up modern animal bones, and then you say, oh, there you go. Another article, Triceratops never actually existed. National Post. Scientists say. So here's two of the biggest named dinosaurs, Brontosaurus, Triceratops, neither one of them.
Wait, you just broke my child heart.
Well,
Triceratops doesn't exist.
There's some redemption here at the end, but this was on August 3rd, 2010 in the National Post. Triceratops never existed, scientists say. The famous Triceratops dinosaur never actually existed as a separate dinosaur species. Known for its head and known for its three horns and bony frilled ridge around its head, they believe now that Triceratops was likely just a younger version of the rare Torosaurus. Okay, fine, but what was always displayed? Like, what was the Triceratops supposed to be doing with its head? Right,
like
it has that
fighting,
big ridge around its head.
Yes,
and three horns.
Fight other dinosaurs.
Right. Okay. Fight other dinosaurs, and then its head is this shield thing for its body.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. They say in here, scientists had previously theorized the ridge was used as a form of defensive armor, but now think it was most likely a sign of maturity. If I was a Triceratops, quote, said Mr. Scanella, I wouldn't want anything too damaging to happen to my frill, as it had numerous large blood vessels running all over the surface. I don't imagine a thin, bony shield that can gush blood would be a very effective means of defense. so this ridge, so in the time from when we were kids, when then there's this Triceratops, it's now gone to like, it has actually had this like fleshy, blood-filled ridge around its head.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't even real. It was this younger version of this older dinosaur, which also had a fleshy thing around its head. And they based this on the fact that they never found any young Torosauruses, and they never found any super large Triceratopses. And they discovered that in some of the Triceratopses, the skulls, bones were like thinning in the places where the Torosauruses didn't have horns, like almost they lost their horns or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Over time. And so they thought, well, maybe these two are just the same. But the point of it is they erased one dinosaur that was very popular, one of the most popular, and said it's actually this other creature. And also, that big thing around its head that looks like armor, it would be great for armor. It's actually just like a fleshy blood sac. And like, what? What does that mean? Like, why would that doesn't seem like a thing an animal would have. So they said, quote, the research, which appeared in the Journal of Vertebrate Paleontology, says the neck frill and horns changed shape as the animal aged because they were spongy. It would not harden until the dinosaur was an adult. Even in the most mature specimens we've examined, there is evidence that the skull was still undergoing dramatic changes at the time of death. So that right there tells you something is seriously wrong with this animal, because that isn't a thing animals do. Is that when they're an adult, and no matter what age, your skull's still going through dramatic
Right.
changes.
Yeah.
That means this whole thing is just a mess, right? Because and then they say, well, Triceratops was a more fun name and people loved it more, so we just decided to rename the Torosaurus to Triceratops.
Well, I guess while you're in there.
While you're in there, just messing up everything about this animal.
Yeah.
Why don't we just cancel him? Take a different dinosaur and just call that its name.
Right.
And then say, oh yeah, science is fine. After we smashed on the head of a wrong animal from a different state onto the Brontosaurus for 70 years.
And they knew that killed. I didn't know they knew this for 50 years and sat on it.
Yeah, they knew. They just didn't say anything. Okay, another one. This one is about the Stegosaurus. You know that one with the big spines on its back?
Don't do this to me. Stegosaurus?
I know. This one is the Smithsonian Magazine. A modern vision of the Stegosaurus on display at the Utah Fieldhouse of Natural History. All right. So this one is like, Stegosaurus is no longer the lumbering beast it used to be. Dinosaurs, and this is 100% true. You all remember this. Dinosaurs have changed quite a bit since I was a kid. Tails have been lifted, spines adjusted, skulls switched around, wrist repositioned. They've been given feathers, and that's just the start. But some dinosaurs have changed more than others. So yeah, this is if you does it like when we were like, they used to say like these dinosaurs are these big lizards and they walk around and they lumber and they meh, and now they've turned them into basically birds.
Right.
Have you noticed this? In the span of 30 years or 40 years, these animals have gone from lizards to basically proto-birds. And also the velociraptor, turns out, was only the size of a turkey.
And there's a important point here is why are they doing this? Why is the story constantly changed and being found to be fraudulent? Why they have to fill in all these holes? Because they're addicted to theories. They have to have a theory for everything.
And it's not that people will go like, well, science advances, science changes. It's like, yeah, that's fine. What is not fine is when they say this is the truth.
Right.
And then 3 weeks later they say, no, now this is the truth.
Right.
And then 3 weeks later it's another, like, no, it wasn't. If you constantly change it, it means it wasn't the truth to begin with. It just means you had a guess.
You had a theory. The theory ends up not working. So just let's have a little humility in the first theory and say it could be this, but we don't really know. Instead of saying it was this, I won, give me a Nobel Prize.
Right, and then whoopsie, we had a different.
Yeah, and then generations hence have to deal with it. And it's not a big deal with dinosaurs, but let's talk about disease or something like that, where human lives are actually at stake.
Well, and it is sort of a big deal with dinosaurs because the dinosaurs drive this whole like prehistory narrative.
Well, that's true.
That influences so many people's metaphysics and religion. Then you find out like, oh well, a lot of this is just completely made up.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like okay, so and I'm not an anti-dinosaurist. I'm not a dinosaur denier. I'm just saying this is the Tao of conspiracies. You gotta thread the needle here. So they said the stegosaur had too many spikes. They now think it had 4 instead of 8. It didn't have all these plates on it. Its arms are in a different spot so it could walk better. Basically, the original thing was a total mess and wouldn't work.
Mm.
And politically motivated. Because in World War I, that image of the Stegosaurus got solidified in the minds of scientists and the public based on a campaign of Jingo the dinosaur, the World War I mascot. So they made a papier-mâché Stegosaurus on April 1, 1916. And this was, it was to create, it was by pacifists, basically, to make jabs at the preparedness committee who were preparing for the war. And they called themselves the anti-preparedness committee, which it's like, don't be prepared.
Yeah.
And they said, our government is just like the Stegosaurus, all armor, plate, and no brains. It is difficult to conceive any more proper and appropriate symbol of militarism than that which Anti-Preparedness Committee has hit upon. What could be more like the heavy, stumbling, clumsy, brutal foolery which is destroying Europe than these old monsters of the past, these armored dinosaurs? These beasts, all armor plate and no brains, had no more intelligent way of living than that of, quote, adequate preparedness, just like our government. And that's why the Stegosaurus is like it is. Because of that. Because of that. That's what solidified it in the public mind and in the mind of many scientists. And it was never was real. It was just political nonsense. And then, of course, like I said earlier, the Velociraptor was actually the size of a turkey.
Really?
Yeah, it was
the size of a turkey. That's it?
Yeah, the Velociraptor is the size of a turkey.
Michael Crichton.
Yeah. And then the Archaeoraptor was just a straight up fraud, which the National Geographic published in 1999. Total hoodwinked. There was this farmer. He found some old bones, and he said, "Well, I can get some more money on this if I have a complete dinosaur skeleton." So he got he had a friend that was like an anthropologist or something, a paleontologist, and he got some ancient bird bones and just sort of smashed them together and filled in the bits with some chickens. And so, and then he took it to National Geographic, and he said, "Here, I got this new dinosaur." And they're like, "Great!" And they ran a whole story on it, and it went out to the public. And then, like a year later, they did some CT scans on it, and they said, this is like 10 different things just mashed together."
Do you think they'd fall for that again? Because we could give it a shot.
We could. We should do this and just see how weak the paleontology community is.
Yeah.
We just make together. So you got to get old bones now. You can't just have like brand new bones, but we got to find old bones. And it was this flighted. And this is one of the things. I wonder if this started the craze of making dinosaurs have feathers, because the Archaeoraptor was supposed to be the first earliest flying feathered dinosaur. And it was just a straight up fraud. And that happened in 1999. And since then, they've been giving and I wonder if that was like the start of this fad. I can't prove that, but it is suspicious.
Yeah.
The dinosaurs started getting feathers after this feathered dinosaur that was just made up.
Another missing link bites the dust.
Another missing link, but yeah. Yeah, it was made up. The Archaeoraptor is a composite of at least 3, perhaps even 5 separate specimens. So this is a quote from the article. And then you got to say, well, like, if you're a paleontologist, you're supposedly an expert on skeletons, and you have CT scanners and all this stuff, and you can't even tell how many separate species this thing comes from.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then how can you do that with bones you find in the field? Like, if you're going to say, I have the bones all right here, and I can't tell you how many different species are contained in there. And then you say, well, but I can find a species in Utah and a species in Montana and know that they're the same, and then match them together for a mashup in a museum. It doesn't follow. Right? That doesn't mean anything. If you can't tell, like, some farmer put together 5 different skeletons, and you can't tell what they came from, you're not getting a very good passing score.
Well, you gotta fake it till you make it.
Yeah. So here's the story of the Archaeoraptor. There was this guy. He was, like I said, a farmer. The original fossil was found by a farmer, and he tried to get more money by trimming and cementing several fossils into one whole specimen. The fossil was then, and it was somewhere, I think, in Europe, and the fossil was then illegally exported to the USA, where it was eventually bought for the Dinosaur Museum by its owner, an enthusiastic amateur named Stephen Sirakas, for $80,000. Okay. So after this, the guys National Geographic was contacted about it. And they agreed to study it along with Chinese expert Zhu Xing and get it published in Nature, the science magazine, to be followed by a press conference and the feature issue of National Geographic. However, during his analysis, Philip Currie of the National Geographic noticed the tail did not seem to connect with the body. and I lost my place here. Oh, and that parts of the fossil belonged to the counter slab. He consequently took the fossil to be CT scanned by Tim Rowe, who unfortunately showed that the legs and tail clearly didn't match the rest of the fossil. And the whole fossil could indeed be a fraud. It should have stopped right there, but much to Sir Xerxes' later regret, it didn't. He then instead pressured Rowe and Curry to keep their reservations quiet. Curry then got the fossil looked at by its preparator, Kevin Allenbook, who also noted that it seemed to be a composite of 3 to 5 specimens. And much to Curry's later regret, they never informed the National Geographic of this either. So the whole affair rumbled on. The group then prepared a paper for Nature, which was rejected not because that the findings were bad, but because they didn't do it in time enough to meet the time constraints for the next publication. So they always go like, "Oh, this is their out." They go, "Well, it was never published in a peer-reviewed journal, so it wasn't a real fraud. They didn't make it." It's like, but not because you guys spotted it, just because they were trying to give it to you a week before publication.
Right. You can't go around saying the system works on that one.
Yeah. Okay. So again, the group, let's see. Some of the reviewers did note that the top of the fossils had been illegally imported, and that it seemed to have been somewhat doctored to enhance its value. Again, it should have stopped there. The two journalists rejected your find. Many people have expressed severe doubts about the validity of your fossil, but they decided not to inform National Geographic of the paper rejections. On October 15th, 1999, National Geographic unveiled the fossil and decided to go ahead and publish the Archaeoraptor story in the November issue on the assumption that it would eventually be published. And so then, like, by October 2000, they had to go around and say this thing isn't real. The feathered dinosaur is not a thing. And some guy just made a duck-billed platypus-like creature out of some bones, and we bought it. That they thought the duck-billed platypus was that for a while. You know, when they first got the specimens back, they thought someone had just sewed a duckbill onto a beaver.
Which would be
funny.
funny.
They were really reluctant to believe that existed for a long time. Understandably.
Sure.
All right, another one was the Hadrosaurus. Now, you might not know what this one is, but you've seen it. That's the one that walks around and has that big crest on the top of its head that goes back. It would make this like honking sound.
Oh, the big tube, the tube head dinosaur?
Tube head.
Yeah.
Okay. Tube heads aren't real.
Oh, no.
Hadrosaurs aren't a single dinosaur, quote. They're an actual family of duck-billed dinosaurs. While one subfamily is crestless, the other had a snorkel-like crest, the tube, that didn't allow the dino to breathe underwater or snort fire, which have both been suggested from one time to another. So far, so good, right? Well, the problem arises when you consider that the archetypal hadrosaur, give or take now, that's the first dinosaur discovered in the United States, the hadrosaur. The archetypal hadrosaur was the only one of its kind ever discovered, and we don't have its skull.
If we don't have its skull, how do we know it had a tube on its head?
Right, they just made that up.
Oh.
It probably didn't look like the way it was modeled. So there's really no evidence of that at all, the snorkel head. They just manufactured that and stuck it on top. So anyway, dinosaurs are largely fake. That's why when people go like dinosaurs are fake, and then it's like, well, hold on, it's the Tao of Conspiracies. There are definitely animals that don't exist anymore that sometimes left bones.
Most of them were just turkeys.
But
mean turkeys.
But all of these, like when someone says this is why you're perfectly justified and why you should consider doing this in the future, I'm dropping the articles like British people do. In future. In hospital. In future, when some scientist says, you know, this is what it is, and the Big Bang and all the universes and the multiverse, and the dinosaurs with the coney heads and they snort the fire, and we've got the feathers, and all the viruses in the world, you just say, yeah, maybe, right? You don't have to like go, and then they try to bully you into doing it because they really want like to supplant. They want to have dogma, but there's no, and it's just like this. It's like this idea that our dogma is true and unchanging, and everyone never look at the fact that it changes literally all the time. It's always true, but never mind that what we said this week is different than what we said last week.
Science really is the crappiest religion. It's like when they try to play the religion game, they suck at it.
They do. They do. So how do we confront these people? I will leave off this discussion with this quote from Sun Tzu. Build your opponent a golden bridge to retreat across. From The Art of War. So that build your opponent. So like I found this. I was thinking, these. Have you seen these videos of all these people getting really upset about masks in grocery stores?
Yeah.
Like that's not how you do it, guys. What you got to do is you got to make it so that it's easier for them to do what you want than to fight you. And so you just say, hey, you needed me to wear a mask? You build them a golden bridge. You say, can you go get me I just got to stand out here for a minute. Here, I'll give you this money. Can you go get this stuff for me? And then just bring it out to me, and I'll give you $5 bucks. And there you go. Like you just got to adopt the servant mindset. Just treat other people as your servants now. And you pay them the money, and they go do the stuff, and then you don't have to do it anymore. You don't have to go to the grocery store.
Yeah.
That's the correct answer. I don't know. I got all riled up about dinosaurs and this virus stuff because none of it makes any sense, and everyone just says, "Oh yeah, it's better."
Right, and this instead of reacting to the pointing out of outlier data or data that doesn't fit the model at all, with suspicion and anger that you have questioned the dogma.
Yeah,
science is not dogmatic. It's not a good dogma system.
Yeah, and so you think about all that I just went through with dinosaurs, and all of the obvious inaccuracies that we have with virology, and inability, like what it means when your models are consistently wrong. Like this is what we do in physics. If our models don't match, we just say, we have to change the models. But they say if our models don't match, then we still just keep them. It's fine.
Right.
It doesn't, like if your model, and so then you say, okay, well, what about what other things are they wrong about? And this is where you get into like, well, is global warming what they say it is? Is overpopulation the great crisis that they contend? Is that? Who knows? And the fact of the matter is, unfortunately, many scientists are simply not that smart. You have to be a very smart guy to be like a mathematician or something. You don't have to be a very smart guy to find bones and shove them together. You got to be above average.
Yeah.
But a lot of our listeners are above average.
Half the population is above average.
That's why I now am am announcing MAPS is also an accrediting institution handing out doctorates.
Awesome.
Because have you noticed everyone wants to really call themselves doctor now?
Oh man, everybody.
So I've started calling myself doctor because I figure what's the difference between us handing out a doctor title and like Yale?
Yeah, Yale makes stuff up all the time.
Basically the same.
They're infested with Chinese spies and they're handing out doctorates.
Right. And
if there's one thing I can say about MAPS is we're not infested with Chinese spies.
No, we are not infested with Chinese spies.
Don't make that face. Don't make the squinty eye face.
The slanty eyes.
Yeah, don't do it.
That's why I'm announcing that our first graduate is the Duke of Alba, our mutual friend.
Oh, congratulations, Duke of Alba.
PhD. He has a PhD in medieval studies and in Spanish literature.
That's fantastic. I'm so happy for him.
And
Congratulations,
he can now
Duke.
use that. He can now call himself Duke of Alba, PhD, or Dr. Duke, whatever it is, if he wants to be a rapper.
So he's a doctorate in medieval sciences. Is that what you said?
Yeah, in Spanish literature.
In Spanish literature. That's great.
And now he can also go and he can get bones from old Spanish literature writers like Raymond Lull.
Yeah.
And he can just smash them together with other and put them on the body of a horse and make a centaur.
That sounds great.
So congratulations.
Indeed.
I hate dinosaurs now. I'm so mad about dinosaurs. I loved dinosaurs as a kid, and they just made them all up.
And it's like, how do you expect me to trust you, scientists, when you did this to me?
I know. And the T-Rex, I worked with a paleontologist one time, and he was like, the T-Rex, and I was like, now what about the little arms? Because the little arms seem dumb. Are we sure about the little arms? And he's like, I think they were like forks. I'm like, what? It's like, they use it to just sort of like grab some meat and pull it up to their mouth. Like that's not the whole image of the T-Rex that you have is that it just bends over and takes a big chunk out of things. It doesn't like use its arms as little forks to pull it up to its mouth in a dainty fashion.
Could it even reach its mouth? I mean,
that's what I mean. Like the arms of the T-Rex, I'm telling you now, are probably going to turn out to not be correct.
It's like they just lost the middle bones.
Yeah, I was talking with a paleontologist one time, a guy that had a cardboard cutout of Xena Warrior Princess in his office. And he was like, oh, yeah, they're just forks. And I was like, they can't just be forks. That doesn't make any sense. Why would they? No other animal has that. And he was like, well, And then he talked about eagles mating for a while. I told you, speaking of Xena, I've mentioned how Pluto lost its status, didn't I?
Was it racist?
No. This is insider baseball. But there was a guy who was an astronomer, and he discovered a planet about the size of Pluto, a little farther away. And he was like, "Great!" Now, there's a long-standing thing in science, in astronomy particularly, that if you discover something, you get to name it. Right? That's been forever.
Right.
Like the Hale-Bopp comet. If you discover a comet, you can name it whatever you want. So he discovered a planet, and it was going to be the 10th planet. And he was like, this is great. And they were like, this is awesome. You discovered a planet. Great. What do you want to name it? And he said, Xena, as in Xena Warrior Princess.
Oh, no.
And everyone went, you can't do that. We have a theme. We have like a Roman god theme going on. Like there's Mercury and there's Mars and there's Venus. You can't just Jupiter and then Xena Warrior Princess. And he's like, this is the rules. If you find a thing, you can name the thing. He was a complete autist about it. They argued for a long time. And there had already been people that had wanted to redefine the definition of a planet for a while, but they never had any traction. And their main argument was, look, there's a lot of stuff around back behind Pluto that's basically a similar size. It's going to get out of hand. We're going to have too many in the future. It's like we haven't found them all, but we're pretty sure they're going to be there. And so they said, let's just get rid of, and we'll have to come up with some reason, and maybe they were trying to finagle because everyone liked Pluto. So they were like, well, can we come up with something to like sort of keep Pluto, but get rid of those, like some definition of what a planet is. And they were finagling around for a while. This has been going on for like 10, 15 years. And then this guy comes out and he's like, and there's going to be a 10th planet named Xena. And everyone was like, okay, we got to do something about it.
We got to take care of this.
And that was the main motivating factor, which gave impetus to the people that were in the camp to get rid of they suddenly had power because of this crazy guy wanted to name a 10th planet after Xena Warrior Princess and mess up the whole theme. And so then they couldn't, in their rush to do this, they couldn't come up with any way to salvage Pluto with any definition that would keep Pluto, but also rule out his thing, which was almost identical. So they just decided, to hell with it. Pluto's gone now. We're not having Xena Warrior Princess planet. And for a while, that thing was just floating around called Xena, and it was a microplanet.
Yeah.
And then he had enough pressure on him that he finally dropped it and gave it some name like DT-125 or something. stupid thing because they were just not going to have that. But that's why Pluto, revolve in peace. That's why it's not there anymore, is because of these weird scientists' obsession with leather-bound dominatrixes.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how public school science curricula get written.
100%. It's all nonsense. Like when you don't want to know how the sausage is made.
Yeah,
that's all I'm saying.
It's pretty gross. It's pretty gross sausage.
It's very gross.
So what's the deal with Xena Warrior Princess and science academic types?
I don't know. She just really ticked all their buttons. What's her name? What was her name? Lucy. It's not Lucy Liu. That was that Chinese girl.
Lawless?
Yeah, Lucy Lawless. They just I don't know. There was all these. It was a big thing. Like, scientists are nerds.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in a particle accelerator lab, all of the screensavers on the computers were of images from the show Stargate.
Yeah, but of course. That makes sense.
And there's a lot of, yeah, because that's what everyone wants to. They all watch sci-fi and they want to make it real.
Yeah.
That's the motivating factor behind all of science.
Mm-hmm.
Is you want to make sci-fi real. And it seldom works out the exact same. But, they get some successes. We have those doors that open now, like in Star Trek. Pretty good. And we have communicators. Not bad.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a show about that called How Star Trek Invented the Modern World. The little documentary with William Shatner going around claiming every technological invention as his.
And it's a little more true than I'd like it to be.
I know, and it's very true. Regardless of what they say, CERN was created primarily for people to try and make a portal or wormhole.
Mm-hmm.
I know that it's got on paper it's justified by something else, but they wanted to make a wormhole. They're not going to succeed because the energy required to sustain a wormhole is near infinity. But they wanted to try.
Sure. So
anyway, just everyone think about science in a different way, and maybe diseases don't work how you think, and know about dinosaurs. When you go in to see the dinosaurs, just be like,
And most of the science funding that we're paying for in taxes is the point of it is really so that some nerds can open up a wormhole and go off into the universe to find green space babes.
That's true. The Venusians.
Yeah, they just want these interstellar Amazon women to be their hot mommy girlfriend.
Xena warrior princesses.
Yeah, yeah.
It's truer than you would like to think.
This is why we have to destroy the jock-nerd dichotomy so that scientists can get women and won't spend all this money on this stupid stuff anymore.
Yeah, well, I go back and forth on that because it's on some. It's like maybe all of our messed up desires in part drive progress in a way. Like, guys, the fact that there's a giant market of men willing to just waste away on the couch playing video games has really driven both AI and graphics technology to extremes. Because they exist, it's profitable to do that, and now we have on the verge of artificial intelligence because of laziness.
Here's the thing about women, though. They civilize male drives and make them useful.
Mm-hmm.
Married men do much more useful work, I think, just on average, than not young unmarried men, but I'm talking like people that are so nerded out and hopelessly dweeby that they cannot have a functional relationship. They're the guys that are trying to make wormholes.
I agree, but at the same time, maybe you need this underclass of non-achieving men to waste their lives on things. Because otherwise, how would you have the VCR?
I could have gotten through life nicely without the VCR.
Well, I know. I'm just saying it creates things because, like, the VCR technology, recording technology, was almost all driven by the pornography industry.
I'm sure, yeah.
You know, like it was almost all of it. And so all of these vices that people have, I don't know, maybe they serve a purpose in a grander scheme. Who knows? This is licensed to all of our followers to sit around on the couch, play video games, do nothing, and just that's your way you contribute to science. By being that market that drives it.
It'd be about as useful as making fake dinosaurs.
Yeah. I can't believe Triceratops is fake.
I know.
The tubey head one is the worst. Because the whole tube head was just out of nothing.
I'm gonna put a tube on my head.
Yeah. And the one, we should try to see if we can get a fake fossil through peer review.
Okay. New Maps project.
That would be brilliant. If we can get a fake fossil through peer review.
I bet we could do it. I'll come up with an aging process for fake bones.
Yeah. What should we make it look like?
We could make it like the Blob. It won't have bones. We could just submit an empty box as our fossil.
Mm-hmm.